There we are. We have this man, the myth, the legend, Paul Rene, because PVK, Paul Rene. I like Paul Rene, it sort of rhymes. And but I just asked him how he's doing, and he didn't. It got complicated quick, so I said, "Well, let's get into it. Let's get into it. What did you want to talk about, Paul? I don't have to rando you. Your story's well out there. You're one of these guys that has offered yourself up to the corner as a someone that we're all sort of living through." He laughs. He laughs.
What do I want to talk about? Well, I mean, I, my face is out there, but um, maybe we do a little bit of where I came from because I
Okay.
haven't talked about that too much. Um,
We're not going to expect homework from the audience that they have to go back and go through the Paul Nichols archive and hit all of the stories. So go ahead,
I,
bring us up to speed. Let us know. Let us know what's relevant.
uh, so so I was born in San Antonio. Um, my parents were in the army at the time. They met in Germany at some point in 1981. Um, I think my interest in Russia, which, obviously I had no idea that kind of this fear of the Cold War and a vague interest in Russia was going to dovetail with where I ended up religiously. But it did. But that comes from my parents being in the army at the end of the Cold War. And I think at least my dad worked in some sort of signal intelligence where he was put through a Russian program and he had to listen to transmissions or whatever. Um, and both of my parents come from relatively broken homes. My dad is the youngest of three. He grew up in a very wealthy suburb of Boston, Massachusetts called Reading. And his dad was an engineer at IBM. So up until he was 14, they lived a very good life. But around the time he was 14, um, his dad died of some sort of lung disease or lung complication um, that would probably be curable today. And that made his mother apoplectic. And according to my uncle Chaz, I'm closer to him than I am to my father at this point. He's the oldest of the three. They just stopped talking about um, their dad. And I don't know where I heard this, but at some point I heard this idea that if you don't keep telling the stories, eventually the memories die. And um, he became somewhat of a ne'er-do-well. Apparently, Reading High School sends a disproportionate number of people to Harvard. Surprise, surprise. But um, he got into drinking and making pipe bombs.
That won't get you
And
into Harvard necessarily.
well, he got away with it. He ended up um, more or less signing the application to some Oklahoma university on the airplane, the same place his brother went to, and he crashed out and went around the country a bit. I understand he was in Northern California at some point, and maybe Las Vegas, and eventually he ended up in the army.
When
And
was your
if
father born?
uh, he was 25 when I was born. I was born in February 1982, February 3rd. My
Okay.
birthday is next week.
All right.
Um, and I think my mom was 20 or 21 or something like that.
Okay.
Um, and he ended up in the army. Um, and uh, my mother, her father was a medical tech in the Air Force, and he was stationed in Europe um, in the 60s. And these are all kind of vague because we haven't done a very good job of maintaining a family history. Not that there's a particularly coherent family history, but my vague understanding is um, he got into some sort of sexual or romantic relationship with some Italianish woman. And
Italianish.
I mean, there's all sorts of claims I've heard. The only real, well, my mom and her three sisters were born in Europe. They ended up back in California at some point. Um, and my mother had a lifelong hatred of Ronald Reagan and Republicans because Reagan was governor when she was living there. And at least her claim is that things he did ended her gifted and talented school or something like that.
Uh,
And then they eventually moved to San Antonio, and that's where she went to high school, and eventually she ended up in the army. They put her mother into a mental ward. She had
wow.
awful schizophrenia, and she beat all of her three daughters. My mom is the oldest of three. And well, so uh, somewhere in 1981, I was conceived, let's say 9 months before February 3rd. And uh, she went back to the States, and my dad decided he didn't want her raising the child alone. So he convinced her to marry, and they're married in January 1982. I was born in February 1982. Um, then we moved back up to Massachusetts to be near his mother. Um, his older sister, my dad's older sister, also lives up there. They live in New Hampshire, so we were all relatively close. I don't think we could afford to live in Reading. I think we lived with my grandmother. I was her first grandchild, and I was her favorite. So we ended up in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is a rundown mill town. And at the time we moved there, um, well, there were a lot of Greeks in Lowell, I think, but there were also a lot of Cambodians and other immigrants. And they experienced a lot of issues with crack cocaine and other drugs, is my understanding. And we lived in a really shitty apartment for poor people. Um, and three more children were born while we lived up in Massachusetts. And I grew up standing in the snow, taking the school bus, waiting for the school bus to go to school. And around the time I was about to turn 9 was when we moved down to Texas. We drove down through the Carolinas, and at some point went west, entered into Texas. The kids ended up staying in San Antonio with my maternal grandfather and his second wife. While they worked out where to live in Austin, we ended up in 78744 Dove Springs, which was one of the less good
Mm,
neighborhoods in Southeast Austin. Um, while I was growing up there, we had a bit of the Crips and Blood stuff. And there was a lot of talk about gang colors. And two more kids were born in Texas. So I'm the
wow.
oldest of six. Um, and my dad grew up in a Christian family, Northern Baptist. Um, my when my grandmother died in, I don't know, somewhere around 2009 to 2011, I forget exactly when. I went back up to Massachusetts with him, and her funeral was in the same church we went to with her when I was a kid, the same church my dad grew up in. Um, and so she always wanted me to be um, religious, but my dad rejected Christianity when he was a teenager, and my mother had all sorts of issues with respect to just dealing with people um, because of her childhood. And so we never really had family friends. We didn't go to church. My dad was a committed atheist and um, tried his damnedest to make us atheists. I forget exactly what it's called, but whatever the American Atheist Association was, I think that they were headquartered in Austin. And I think before, when I was a preteen-ish, they had their national conference in Austin, so he took us. So he was really trying to encourage this materialistic stuff. But because of my parents, we didn't have family friends, we didn't have a church, we didn't have community. Uh, so we were very isolated growing up, and sort of like the children of immigrants, uh, a push towards education was the main focus, with very little else. And I ended up going through the science magnet middle school and the science magnet high school. And I did pretty well, but I was not particularly well adjusted, let's say, when I graduated high school.
Hmm.
And a lot of a lot of what I've been trying to do since I graduated high school was figuring out how to fix all of that to a greater or lesser extent. But um, a lot of headwinds. I remember in 1988 when um, Star Trek: The Next Generation came out. Um, I was all into that stuff, building Legos, science and technology, watching PBS. That was how I lived. I remember when that show premiered, I was drinking beer at 6 years old.
Oh man.
So I don't, you know, maybe it's the sort of boomer, I'm not your dad, I'm your friend sort of thing that was going on there. And also just kind of
You weren't
not really,
sneaking it, you were drinking with your dad?
yeah. I had access to alcohol from a very young age. It's not like I
Wow.
had it all the time, but
Yeah.
probably wasn't a great thing. And I mean, related to this thread is when I was 15 in high school, my dad was a bit of a philanderer. Um, After we moved to Austin, he spent a, he was trying to be a writer. He was hanging out with musicians. At some point, one of the reasons we moved to Austin was because the University of Texas was there. And eventually he enrolled and worked on finishing a college degree. And so he liked hanging out with college girls. And uh, he would, we've got a spring break destination in Texas called South Padre Island. And he would go down there. And the first time I went with him when I was 15. And uh, we would, at one end of the island, the end closer to Mexico, there was a camping ground where the poorest of college students stayed during spring break, and that's where we stayed in tents. And he'd worked out how to sneak me into the club as if I were 18. Um, and so that was the kind of stuff I did with him. And the first time I smoked marijuana was in a tent when I was 18 in South Padre Island. Uh, my dad had some rules, like he wasn't going to introduce me to it, but he didn't stop me partaking in that situation. And later, I got access to it through him, since that, I guess you could say, that seal was broken. And um, I ended up going to UT. It was the only place I applied. I did electrical engineering. I was pushed in that direction because his father, my dad's father, was an electrical engineer at IBM. I think he went to Northeastern working the summers to pay for his tuition. And I was good at that. But after I turned 21, the girl I was interested in high school was also going to UT in civil engineering. We got together October 2001, about a month after the attacks. At the time, I was working for the Defense Department through a UT research lab. I was at work on September 11th at my computer. I got off early. Um, After I turned 21, uh, it was academics, heavy drinking, a lot of pot smoking, and um, regular sex with my girlfriend. And that was all relatively fine as it could be. And we planned on getting married after we graduated, but I got pushback from my dad, and that whole relationship ended up turning into a 10-year waste of time, more or less.
What kind of
Uh,
pushback? About her or about marriage?
about marriage, I think. I don't exactly recall, so I may be inaccurate in what I'm saying, but I vaguely recall him pushing against that. So we never made plans, and um, after about year 4 or 5, things got pretty bad, but it carried on until 2012. And at the time, I I didn't really work after university. Um, I didn't have my driver's license. I didn't get that until 2010, I think.
Wow.
But my girlfriend
She drove you
did.
around?
She drove me around.
You're a brave man. Think about that line from Chad's song, Confess Your Sins on Zoom. Here's a little dude having his girlfriend drive him around. Oh,
Well, I
oh.
mean, like this is all real, and I think,
Yeah,
I mean, people have heard various opinions come out of my mouth, but not a lot of people know
yeah, where you come
how.
from. Yeah.
So, um, so she got a job. She was working. I wasn't really accomplishing anything. And then late 2006, I finally got a job because my student loans came due, which wasn't that bad. I got grants and I got loans. So, uh, I only had like 22,000 to pay off. And so I ended up getting a software job, my first one out of college. And between her civil engineering salary and mine, we made over 100,000, which in early 2000s money was pretty good. And so I paid off those loans very quick. Um, I'd always wanted to do photography primarily because I was interested in making movies. That was the thing I was most passionate about. I thought about doing radio, television, film at UT, which wouldn't have been a great idea. But my parents got me interested in Siskel and Ebert, and I became obsessed with movies. And when I got access to the internet, which is actually relatively early, like I'm talking about 92, 93, because my dad worked for the state and we had a direct ISDN line to the house. I had access to email and that sort of thing. And this was all before there was a web browser. But after the web browsers hit, I started reading Roger Ebert's movie reviews on his website religiously. And that set me on a path on what are the basic things I need to know to make a movie. And so the still photography was part of my effort towards mastering filmmaking. And so I ended up, after paying student loans, dropping $10,000 on a digital SLR and lenses, which was outrageous given my skill level at the time. But I think people can attest to my photography skills at this point. Um, so it wasn't a complete waste, but it was probably not wise. And I was tired of working, and so I decided I was going to quit my job and become a full-time photographer. But all I ended up doing was sitting around the apartment getting fat and not accomplishing anything for like 3 years. Um, so,
And your girlfriend subsidized this.
oh yeah.
Wow.
Well, I mean, uh, she around 2009, 2010, she quit her first civil engineering job and got another job being an inspector on the new toll road that was being built. And unbeknownst to me, on rainy days, she would go to a motel with a coworker instead of coming home. But I was a horrible boyfriend, so um, maybe on some level it was a wash. And I didn't find that out until April 2012 when we were breaking up. Because she kept a diary on the computer, and as being someone who grew up doing computer stuff since I was like 5 or 6 years old, like I was using DOS at that age. In fourth grade, I was writing my papers on the computer in a DOS-based text editor and printing them out. So I knew how to get at those files, even though they were protected. And I found out what she was doing,
Wow.
and I told her to cut things off with him. But that 2012 was when I had to seriously take a look at my life and rebuild things from scratch. So I got back into software development, and by 2014, so basically 2 years, I went from no income to making 100,000 plus on my own for the first time in my life. And I mean, it wasn't a bad existence, but I didn't have any particular um, goal or direction. I got into the online dating stuff and messed around quite a bit. And in 2016, um, that was, I guess it was late summer is probably when I hit Jordan Peterson. Um, that was a major turning point, but that was like 10 years ago at this point almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty amazing.
But uh, that wasn't the thing that, let's say, disabused me of my materialism. Um, I've always been very aggressive and power hungry and ambitious, though I am extremely lazy. I think I'm low on industriousness or something. I forget.
Conscientiousness.
I think it's moderate on conscientiousness and like
Uh,
low on
yeah, they're
industriousness or
split up
something.
into subcategories. Industriousness is one of those. Yep.
Um, so I mean, I've gotten by on my cleverness and my intelligence, not Not my work ethic, though. I'm able to sustain a decent work ethic. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made the progress with bodybuilding. Um, but in 2006, for whatever reason, and it's probably because that, and I've never watched the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas, but it was probably that scene where he's talking about the art of war that got it into my head. And so I picked up a translation from Thomas Cleary of The Art of War, and I started reading that because I was like, well, I want to win. I want to dominate people. I want power. So I'll read The Art of War. And that started my journey into Taoism. And I went about picking up every um, translation work of Thomas Cleary in the Taoist canon and ran through all of that. And that started dissolving my materialism. Um, my mom was a lifelong is a lifelong Democrat. She did the whole election judge thing, and she made me do it several times. And so I had this kind of default liberalism. I voted in um, the Gore Bush election when I was a freshman at UT. Um, and I remember when Kerry was running in 2004, I got into it with anti-abortion people on UT campus. So that's where I was coming at things at the time. But the what started to pull me out of that, first it was the Taoism, then it was the financial crash, and podcasts were just starting to be a thing. And so I listened to NPR a lot. Not so much anymore, but I got into this early podcast they did called Planet Money, which at first was all about why are we having an economic crisis? And that led me into another pod, not a, well, yeah, it led me into another podcast called Econ Talk with Russ Roberts, and also a blog written by a George Mason University economics professor, Tyler Cowen, called Marginal Revolution, which is a reference to the Austrian economists. And that was my first step towards kind of moving away from the left. I started to see that um, there's something to economics. There are limitations to what we can do in terms of handouts and taxation, that sort of thing. And then it would have been 2012 when the Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind came out. And that was another blow because, and despite the fact that Jonathan Haidt, um, as much as he tried to be fair, he never really escaped his um, prior politics. It was clear from that book, like there are temperamental and likely genetic reasons why some people are right leaning or conservative and some people are left leaning or liberal. And so it was it was clear it's not a matter of, well, these people just are not educated enough to understand the truth and to believe in the right things, that there are real differences there. And then all of this came together at the same time when Peterson hit. I was, and but even more so Pageau, um, because I could start to see how all this stuff tied together. And Peterson would talk about Taoist stuff, and I could see how all these um, patterns were interrelated. Pageau often talks about analogical thinking, and uh, it was Taoism that unleashed my ability to think analogically. And this is kind of all over map. I apologize, but in 2010, uh, while I was not working and pretending to be a photographer, I decided to teach myself audio engineering because I have a background in electrical engineering. I understand signals and filtering frequencies and all that, so it was relatively easy for me to pick that up. And so I have a bit of skill in recording and mixing music. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the loudness wars. So, but at this point, after having done these sorts of things for these many years, you've probably heard of compression in terms of audio. Well, what we tend to think of compression as making something sound louder, but what compression is really about is you've got a certain dynamic range in your audio signal. You've got softer moments, you've got louder moments. And so what compression does is actually just pushes down the louder moments.
Yep.
And then you boost the whole thing up. And so there's less variation between the loudness and the softness. And at some point in the history of recorded music, someone got the idea, what if I put compression on the output of the whole mix to make it sound a bit louder?
Oh.
And that's usually called bus compression. And vinyl records put limitations on how much you could compress because if there's not enough variation in the grooves of the record, um, then that'll cause issues. But when you can compress the hell out of audio on the radio, and so every radio station back in the day would add more compression to sound louder than the next. And when
Oh.
CDs came out, you didn't have those physical limitations of the analog medium. So a lot of recordings, especially in the mid 90s and later, employed a lot of compression that just makes them sound awful. The reason I'm saying this is to illustrate what I gained with analogical thinking was what the bus compression does is on top of making things louder, putting a global effect on the whole work kind of glues it together. And so when I was doing Photoshop in the late 2000s, at some point it occurred to me, or maybe it was the early 2010s after I started the audio engineering, is there an equivalent to bus compression in image editing? Because back in the day, I'd have to manually like select a person and then do selective edits to the selected person and then the background in order to get the right tone in the final image I was editing. And I realized if I add something like contrast over the whole thing at the end, it glued it in together. And so that's the Taoism got me to the point where I could start seeing how these patterns were related across different things. Um, and so all those things came together with Peterson, and I could see that he was right about just about everything he was saying. And so when he said we're a Christian culture, I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm a Christian. I've got the Taoism, I've got the economics and the finance, I've got the moral psychology, I've got my electrical engineering background, my pure mathematics background. It's clear he's pointing to correct patterns. So in early 2017, I started attending a uh, charismatic church around Easter, and this is what I often refer to as the fog machine rock band church. And I was working at a telehealth startup at the time, run by a South African rugby player, And he brought one of his buddies who ended up in the South African diaspora in Australia to be the chief finance officer. Warren Erickson, I think is his name. I think they're back in Australia at this point. And him and his wife had 5 kids. And so one of the reasons I connected with him was because it was like, this is sort of like my family if it worked. uh, uh, so because there was a kind of a Christian tone to the startup,
Yeah.
which is unusual, and because I was doing the Peterson stuff, I was openly talking about thinking about going to church, and so he invited me. And what this was it was a an attempt to plant a church for an Australian church in Melbourne called Planet Shakers. A lot of people have heard of Hillsong, which is in Sydney. Not many people have heard of Planet Shakers, but Planet Shakers was desperate to become like Hillsong, and they were desperate to plant their flag in the States. And so somehow they got connected with um, a youth pastor who was also a former used car salesman. Um, I'm pulling out all the stereotypes today. Um, and so that guy moved down from Portland, um, started the church there, and Warren Erickson invited me, and I started going. And I was like, I'm just going to take this seriously. And I guess you could say the liturgical structure of these sort of churches is you come in and it's like 15 minutes of very exciting songs to get your energy up. And everyone is white people dancing and jumping up and down, getting their blood running. And then they then they cut into the sad
All
songs.
right. Three
And
fast, three slow, one to get ready and one to go. That's the formula.
and so and then you know then they play some video and the pastor walks up and then people come up to say about what's going on in the church this week, and then you go into the sermon, and then towards the end of the sermon the keyboard player starts playing music and the other band members come up, and then there's the altar call. And so I was taking that seriously. One Sunday I did the altar call. And they bring you back into a room with tissues where you can cry it out or whatever. And I mean, nothing is ever really going to cure my cynicism, let's say. But I went along with it. And um, soon enough, I was volunteering, taking photos during the service because I had the photography skills. And I did their catechism class. And the way that worked is during the week at night, we would do a catechism class once a week. Excuse me. And then at the end of, I don't know, 6 weeks or something, uh, we would come up, we came on a Saturday and they handed us this stapled packet of paper, and you fill out all your anxieties and your sins or whatever. And just like the founders of Planet Shakers did in their living room however many years ago, you'd put the paper into the shredder. And at some point I got baptized in the church, though I got baptized again in the Orthodox Church because we don't consider non-Trinitarian baptism to be real.
Planet Shakers wasn't Trinitarian?
Uh, they don't baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit.
Oh,
Um, so and I couldn't tell you whether any particular person or the church was Trinitarian or non-Trinitarian, but they definitely didn't follow rituals in a way that I felt could be considered
yeah.
valid in the Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
And at some point, I got tired of the um, telemedicine startup and the used car salesman pastor ran a church app company upstairs during the week. And so they wanted to hire me. So there was this point where I was taking classes at night and working upstairs at the church during the day and, doing the photography on Sunday. And that went fine for a while. I even during they had a second class. During the second class, I even had hands put on me and I started faking tongues, as they say.
Zoom puts a little hand up.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I took it very seriously because I was like, Jordan Peterson more or less said you had to take Christianity seriously, and I didn't know a way to approach that other than just doing the thing. Um, but sooner or later, I got burned out, and the first thing I did was I stopped doing photography during the service, and pretty immediately I realized I wasn't interested in what was happening anymore. What kept me um, motivated on Sundays was the photography, not the
Mm,
church.
mm.
And this was around 2018, and I decided. Well, I think what happened was my first interaction with Peugeot on Twitter. Um, I mean, I still have some level of belief in Darwinian evolution. I haven't completely given up on that. I think there's validity to the theory. And, like people around me at this church, they weren't into that. They were materialists, but they were creationists. And so all these things were pointing, well, I tweeted at Peugeot about this, and I think he replied back something like, well, maybe you should find another church. And I just decided, well, I don't think I can become Catholic. And it wasn't exactly because of the sex scandal. I think if that's gonna if corruption and sin is gonna turn you off from the church, then you don't understand people. Um, but I didn't see myself becoming Catholic, and I couldn't do the Protestant thing anymore. And it seemed like the Orthodox thing was working out for Peugeot. So I just did a Google search for Orthodox churches, found the church I now attend in Austin, and I put their Saturday evening prayers, Vespers, in my phone calendar as a weekly event so I'd get a reminder. And it was probably 4 weeks of seeing the notifications before I finally went. And at the time, we just had the campus downtown. And the first time I went, it was the Feast of the Transfiguration, and we have a Greek church in town called the Transfiguration. And there's a part of our culture is uh, if there is a church whose name is a particular feast in your area, then we generally will go attend a service at that church. And so there's nobody there at Vespers, but there was a guy watering the plants outside there and he told me what was up. And so I went back the next week and I wasn't sure about attending on Sundays, but I found out that the church had already been growing significantly to the point where they had to get special permission from the bishop to be able to run two liturgies on Sundays. which is a very unusual thing. And so there was one at 8:30 and there was one at 10:30. And I started going to the 8:30 and then skipping out of most of coffee hour to sneak over to the Charismatic church because I didn't want to tip people off, especially because I worked for the pastor, um, that my religious affiliation was changing. And I did that for a while. And by, I don't know, late July, early August, I made the decision that I would just tell the pastor that I was not going to do the Planet Shakers thing anymore. And one of the things I started to learn from this is this guy, when you come in, he's very excited to have you. He's very excited to slot you into doing something for the church. And then as long as you're doing what he wants you to do, he mostly ignores you. But the moment you're no longer playing his game, he's suddenly trying to pull you back in.
Oh,
But so we ended up going to have a coffee, and he was trying to keep me from going Orthodox, and I just shut that down. I managed to not lose my job. I ended up leaving in 2019, but I wasn't fired or anything. Um, and so then I just became focused on the Orthodox Church, and I became a catechumen in September. And then in October, like I said earlier, my dad's older brother, Uncle Chaz, and his wife, Roberta, I'm closer to them than I am to my parents. Since 2014, around the time I started, around the time I entered the low six-figure ghetto, um, I started going up to Minnesota to spend time with them. And I've got two younger cousins. The older one, Ben, was born when I was 17, and they were living in Houston. And I remember going down there and meeting him as a baby when I was in Houston for a math competition. Um, and so I went up there, and I ended up going up to attend both of their high school graduations. And in October of 2018, I went up with my brother, number three Austin, to hang out. And while I was up there, uh, there was a schism in the Plant Shakers church plant.
oh,
So they sent one of their enforcers and kicked the pastor out.
oh,
And that happened while I was up there. And so we ended up having to move the offices for the company out of the church into a WeWork. And that's where I worked until August 2019. One of my friends who also worked at the company and who also went to the church, Ricky, he was brought in to do some pastoring at the church at some point. And the way the pastor from Portland operated, he wanted to bring in couples, not just the husband, let's say. And so Ricky was trying to do the pastoring with his wife, but eventually got burned out. And he had the same experience of when he tried to pull away from those commitments. Um, the Portland pastor was trying to pull him back and keep him from leaving and all that. But I got to see the whole, Protestant schism thing. And at this point, there is no Planet Shakers Church in Austin anymore. The Portland pastor went and started his own church called Dreamers Church Austin. And then the assistant pastor, who ended up taking over the Planet Shakers, went and started his own church, which is kind of quasi-affiliated with Planet Shakers. I think it's called Shine Church. And then I just I was just doing my catechism and doing my job. And then it was probably around February when I started looking for godparents. And I asked one of the deacons, and they're basically like, we've got too many godchildren. So I asked the other one at the time, he was Deacon Elisha, but in I think it was around Thanksgiving 2020, he became a priest. So now he's Father Nicholas. So I've it is it's an interesting thing having clergy as your godparents. But so I in August 2019, I left the church app company. I got my first really high paying tech job, highest level of my career. And so I was Orthodox. I was making a lot of money, and I was trying to figure out how to get a wife.
You were living
But
the ortho bro dream.
I guess. Um,
You're working at it. Got to get the wife.
but uh, towards the end of 2019, I'd been dirty bulking. So I was dirty bulking is where you're trying to put on muscle, but you're
Oh,
overeating. So you're putting on too much fat at the same time.
oh.
And so I was overweight, and um, I had my first work trip out to the Bay Area early 2020 in February, right before the lockdowns hit. And then I got back, and sometime in March, we were told to just start working from home. And it wasn't a huge deal because the company I worked for was global, and we were already using Zoom because there are people in Europe and Australia and India already. But I'd since October-ish 2018, I'd been working with a personal trainer at a commercial gym, but I got the sense that they were going to shut the gyms down. So I got on Amazon, and well, at the same time I got the fancy job, I moved into a new apartment in the same apartment complex, but it was the most spacious, best apartment there. And so I had a lot of space. So before the lockdowns really hit, I bought Bowflex adjustable dumbbells and a cheap Japanese workout bench. And um, then they shut the gyms down. My trainer was out of work. So I just started paying him monthly to program my exercises for me. And I cut 40-ish pounds in like 3 months.
Wow. Wow.
Um, I mean, it's not that hard. Like the GLP-1 Ozempic stuff, all it's doing is making you tolerate the hunger easier. It's all about starving yourself primarily to lose weight, though there's some nuances in terms of using your muscles enough and getting enough protein so that you don't experience muscle loss while you're doing that. Um, so I'd lost weight. It was early 2021. I'd gotten nicer clothes. Um, I hadn't yet become a perfume collector like I am now, but I'd started dabbling in that stuff. So I was trying to do all the things to make myself more marketable to women. And I signed up for a matchmaking service called Talkify. And it was a hybrid thing where you got some time with a matchmaker, and there was an app online component. And the idea is you pay all this money, and they would set you up on a series of up to 12 dates. And the idea is you would give them some specifications, and they would gradually improve who they put in front of you as time went. And I did that, and the first date was February 13th. which is right before Valentine's Day. It was a Saturday in 2021, and it was right before the massive snowstorm hit, um, where there was snow on the ground for a week in Austin. And that's how I met my wife, my ex-wife, is before I left the apartment for the date, I had nice jeans. I had my Italian leather shoes on, a nice belt, button-down shirt, and my blazer. Um, I was looking good. I put my phone on a tripod and set the timer and took a selfie. And at some point during the day, I think maybe before I left, I was tired of the online dating thing, but I decided to, of all places, put that photo up on Bumble, and the only text I put in the profile was "I'm too good for you," and the date wasn't great. It was a 30-year-old lapsed Irish Catholic dog mom whose life revolved around vacations and patio happy hours with her friends and her dog. And that was not what I was asking for. But after the date, I saw on Bumble I'd gotten a like. And the way they make money off those apps is if you want preference in terms of women seeing that you like them or you want to know who's liked you, you have to pay for the premium. And so there's this gatekeeping where they make you pay if you want to actually be able to use the stuff. And since I saw the like, I was like, okay, whatever, I'll pay for premium for like a month or 3 months so I can see this. And that was my ex-wife, and she wanted to argue with me. Um, that's why she matched. And um,
Relationship built on arguing, huh?
oh, it's yeah, but worse. So we I got her number. We started flirting. I was trying to get her to come over for Valentine's Day. That didn't work, but I got her to come over Wednesday. Apparently, water wasn't running at her apartment, and so she came over. She took a shower. We had some fun, and she was there with me until that Saturday. And then she went home, and I invited her to church Sunday. And that's how the whole rocky related relationship started. It was within that first week. I don't know how early that she told me that she was living with her boyfriend, who she moved from Southern California with because he got his tech job in Austin during the lockdowns. And so that wasn't the only red flag, but it was the first one, let's
A
say.
pretty big one.
Well, let me tell you, like, at least a solid eight, 24 years old. I stole her from her boyfriend. Um, uh, and word to the wise, like, um, you probably don't want to marry someone with that level of loyalty. Um, but despite, despite despite all my knowledge and intellect and wisdom, um,
You did
my
it
passions
anyway.
my passions are quite strong. Um, yeah, and so after about a year, her she comes from a broken family, divorce, abusive father, um, growing up on the internet and interacting with people on the internet who didn't have good intentions for her. Um, an abusive marriage when she was 20. Um, so I'm not a therapy person. I'm not a therapy speak person, but to use the vernacular, she had a lot of trauma. To the extent that BPD is a real thing, I think she's got it. Um, and that came out um, very emotionally dysregulated, and the I was tasked with managing her emotions, and I think that there is a version of me that could have made that work, but the that burden is heavy, and there's considerations for, well, like how long would it take to fix that? Is it fixable? And I think, and realistically, how fast could I get to the point where I have the wisdom and the patience to manage something like that? And we were engaged in August of 21, but things were already getting nasty between us, and things fell apart late February, early March. We flirted with getting back together um, when she was having some health issues and ended up in the hospital
Mm.
in September, but that fell apart um, in November. And then my brother came to me wanting to move into me, number four. He had a couple of kids with a woman, and then she left him, and she ended up in Oklahoma and had twins with some other guy. So there's only three grandchildren at this point out of the six, and two of them are his, and they're not connected to the family
Mm.
anymore.
Ouch.
So that's not a very good. That doesn't reflect very well on my parents. Let's say that you have
Mm.
six kids and you can't even get six grandkids. But he wanted to move in with me to get his life back together. So I ended up buying the house I live in now about 3 years ago. Um, his heart wasn't really in fixing his life, and he continued his bad ways. And eventually, I pushed him out after Chino. Um, and I've talked about this in places before, but um, the first year we were together, me and the ex-wife, she's from San Bernardino, and I think the place where they live is not too far away, is a town in the area called Beaumont. And so we went there for Christmas 21.
Were you together with her when you were at the Chino conference?
No.
Oh, okay.
Um, so so we flew into the Palm Springs airport. I saw Palm Springs. Uh, we hung out in interior Southern California, and we went back. And so I had all these memories connected to a particular part of California with her. And so when the Chino conference was announced right after I bought the house, all I did was buy the conference. I didn't book any travel. And it was later I decided, well, I'll make a trip of this. I'm doing some consulting on the side with a shipping container tech company in Long Beach, and uh, I wanted to hit Joshua Tree uh, because she'd talked about living off the grid in Joshua Tree a lot with her first husband, and um, as a very music oriented person. I listened a lot to the U2 album. Um, but when I was a young baby, my mom is not a particularly affectionate person. She's very angry and spiteful and violent, and that's almost certainly where I get those aspects of myself. But she cut me off from breastfeeding very early, and she would just sit me in front of the television. Apparently, I watched MTV a lot, and if I fell over onto my side, I would start crying, and she would have to come in and prop me back up. So I've been listening to popular music from a very early age. So I was like, okay, I'll make this trip. I'll fly into Palm Springs. I'll hit Joshua Tree before sunrise and take photos. Spend another night or so in Palm Springs, head to the coast to Long Beach, and then go see another former work friend in Orange County. And then I went over to the hotel in Chino, and that's where I met Doug Westney for the first time. I was at the Palm Springs airport. Uh, the car they had for me was a Bronco. Unfortunately, it was a black Bronco, not a white Bronco. Um, but it was funny in light of what was that guy's name during the riots? Rodney King.
Or Rodney King?
Um,
Those riots.
but the no, it was the Juice, OJ.
Oh, OJ. Oh, the
Because of
white Bronco. OJ's
Yeah,
white
because
Bronco.
of that, it was funny that
Oh,
I'd gotten a Bronco for
oh.
Southern California. But I got to the hotel in my Bronco. I met Doug, and then we hopped in the car and drove over to help. Well, I wanted to meet Grizz, um, and then we helped with the camp a bit, and then I took a handful of people, including Grizz, over to, is it Farmer Boys? Is that the name of that burger place in
There,
California? Something like
there is
that.
one that's like that. Yeah.
And we had burgers, and so that was the start of the conference. And you in your talk, you brought up the Joshua Tree because I'd put some stuff on the Discord while I was having my fun, and I ended up taking one of the photos I took and making a playlist of Southern California desert music that included Orthodox Arabic chants and the Sting song Desert Rose and some of the Joshua Tree stuff and some stuff from Queens of the Stone Age, which is a band that came out of the high desert. And I ended up sending some of that stuff to my ex-wife, and we got back together in June. And then it was just
Now you were
slow.
engaged. You were on and off engaged. Did you had actually gotten married or not yet by
We
that
hadn't
point?
gotten married. That fell
Okay.
through. We ended up getting married in a courthouse in, I think it was October 12th, 2023. It was a Thursday because she wanted to have the church wedding on the same calendar date the following year, which was a Saturday, October 12th. So we got married in the um, courthouse, and it was around that same time in October that I learned that sooner or later I was going to get fired. Um, the company fired almost all of its engineering leadership and replaced them with people from Facebook and Microsoft. And they went from um, one performance review a year to two performance reviews a year. And managers went from being someone who was there to help you and be your advocate to being someone you had to prove that you deserve to keep your job. And so instead of your manager being aware of what you're doing, part of your job became collecting a packet of evidence every 6 months. And so I started looking for another job and that didn't pan out. And I managed to hold on until May 2024. Um, it was after the Symbolic World Conference. Um, and then I got fired. Um, I, I'd already made an appointment to get my wisdom teeth pulled, which I hadn't done up to that point. And I was nervous about it, but I went through it because I was going to lose my dental insurance soon. And like a week after that, May is when the school year is over, and my ex-wife works as an elementary school teacher assistant. They call them paraprofessionals, something like that. And so she was done with the school year, and I think it was a Friday, within a week or two of me losing my job. We'd been drinking a little bit, and she's not particularly emotionally stable. And then she just freaked out, and I don't even know why. But there are a bunch of dirty glasses on the island in the kitchen, and she just started smashing them on the tile in the kitchen. And when I tried, she likes getting nail art done that takes like 4 or 5 hours from a fancy nail artist. And so her nails are relatively strong. And so I tried stopping her and restraining her. She dug her nails into me and scratched up my face. My godparents, their younger son was graduating high school, and the party was the next day, Saturday. And so I texted them some weak excuse about why I couldn't go, which didn't include the fact that my face was all marked up and I was bruised. Um, and she ended up going uh, to Southern California to stay with her mom with no plans of returning. Uh, Eventually, she came back and we smoothed things over and we had the church wedding. And it's this wasn't the only violent incident. Um, she'd smashed drywall in the house. She'd flipped my glass coffee table at some point. There are multiple times when she would, underdressed, run out of the house at night, um, for no particular reason. When we went to for Christmas in December 2023 after getting married, um, she freaked out on me early in the trip and demanded I go home to Austin on my own. I That didn't happen, but I like drinking in airports. And so I like drinking in the Palm Springs airport. So the flight out, we were drinking at the airport, drinking on the plane. And I wasn't feeling that great. And I told her we'd agreed to plans to order Domino's when we got home. And on the Uber ride back, I said I wasn't feeling good. I don't want any pizza. And that became a whole argument where she was trying to convince me to get pizza. And she ended up taking her luggage and leaving for a hotel through New Year's. Um, and so constant contention. Um, and so things never really got better. And so 2024 May, I lost my job. My wife freaks out on me and gets violent. I'm an emotional wreck. I don't know. I've got like $100,000 in savings because I'm not Um, I, I'm as fancy as I am. I'm not really one to really be super materialistic and buy a lot of things. I still drive a really crappy 2008 Yaris that's been paid off since 2016. Um,
I love it. A Yaris.
I have to manually roll down the windows.
That's what you want to drive to pick up the ladies.
Oh, well, it's never hurt me. Because I'm extremely confident and arrogant, and apparently I'm devilishly handsome. So women will overlook a lot. Like I said, like my college girlfriend drove me around for most of that relationship. I know how to do this stuff. So then in December 24, after the church wedding, um, we were cuddling. I was touching on her on the couch, and she couldn't feel things like in her legs or whatever. Um, she had it checked out in December. She ended up in the hospital for a week with um, early signs of multiple sclerosis. Um, and so that um, like physical touch and sex went basically to zero. And that was probably the only thing that was keeping things working. And by April, um, we were not getting along very well. And uh, I was you one of the things that I really need to work on is boundaries and saying no, having a clear sense of who I am and what I'm about, and letting that do a lot of the work of pushing women away that don't belong in my life. But I ended up just ceding a lot of ground to her, um, and letting her emotionality affect me and allowing resentment to build up. And all of that was going to end things sooner or later. Um, and she would just nag me and freak out about small things. And, even if being patient and calm and, I mean, what she really needed was somebody who um, was going to always be there,
Yeah.
and letting her because she's got a deep fear of abandonment. Um, and so letting myself get moved around by her emotions uh, was going to end the marriage. Um, not not that it probably could have worked anyway, because um, you know not not having a steady job, worrying about depleting the savings, not sure where my life was going, and then having to support someone who wanted to work her job and come home and play video games and watch TV all night, and didn't want to go dancing with me and do the things that I wanted to do, but I had to manage her emotions and take care of her. Um, Even if it hadn't been that time where my career collapsed, sooner or later something would happen that would um, strain the relationship to a breaking point. Um, I've 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 been watching a lot of YouTube videos on BPD and that sort of stuff, and um, it can be more or less cured or go into remission, people say, but um, it's not easy to do. And especially when there are a lot of other stressors in the mix, it's going to be hard to handle that. So, April, we were in Lent. Um, my friend Dorian, um, who I met in 2016 when I was teaching at a coding boot camp, and I pushed him along the Jordan Peterson stuff and encouraged him to go to church. Eventually, they were pregnant. Him and his wife were pregnant with their second kid, and they wanted to move back to Southern Florida to be close to family. And so they moved back uh, a year or so before. And when I'd visited him in the fall of 2022, no, the fall of 2022, that sounds right. But the after the breakup, I'd planned this road trip on the East Coast in the fall of 2022, where I would I would start off in Greenville, South Carolina, because I wanted to go to the Supra at John Here's KP restaurant. And then the next stop was Savannah, Georgia for a few nights. And then uh, I decided to stop in Orlando because one of the first things I did with the ex-wife, she's a Disney adult, another red flag. Um, I wanted to see Orlando outside of the parks and re-experience that a bit. And then the last week was in north of Miami with Dorian. I went to his Protestant church and I was like, "This is not it, bro. You got to go Orthodox." Well, he has a funny habit of listening to the things I tell him, and so last April he'd been attending an Orthodox church, uh, Miami Lakes, which is the one that Pageau and Peterson went to when they were filming that first biblical series for the Daily Wire. And he wanted me to come down for Easter. We say Pascha to be his godfather. So we had to I had to get in touch with his priest. Luckily, his priest knows my priest. I hadn't been very good about attending church because my marriage was dragging me down and I was a wreck. But I managed to get in a confession just before that. And so I was all cleared to be his godfather. So I went down to Florida and did Pascha there with him and was at his baptism. And that was all fine. But then I get back, same issues. Um, one week she wanted to order DoorDash on a Monday, and I didn't want to do that because we didn't have money for it, because trying to survive, not do luxury stuff. And she got super pissed at me. And then the same thing happened again on Wednesday, and I tried to give in to it. Um, and then we did this whole back and forth of, okay, so what do you want to eat? And she was like, I don't know, you pick. And then I threw out options and she wouldn't agree to any of them. And then she threw a fit. We were both on the couch. She got up, she poured her drink on me, ran upstairs, slammed the master bedroom door. I was following a bit behind her. And I was just like, let me in. I just want to get a new t-shirt. And then she ended up opening the door and throwing a pile of my t-shirts at me. And then she started yelling about how she wanted a divorce, which wasn't like new. Like before we got married, she would threaten to break up all the time. And then after we got married, it became threatening to divorce me. And I was like, you can divorce me if you want, but if you're doing that, you can't stay here. And that was the last time she was at home. Um, and we just kind of moved towards divorce after that. Um,
Word to
And
the viewers, she's out there. Just just putting that out there. Just, just letting people know. So keep going.
so I try to get her back for a month. She won't. Oh, there's
There's the
more.
hand. I gotta figure out how to turn those things off. Keep going.
So I try to get her to come home for like a month. Like I don't talk to her for like 5 days or whatever, but then I'm trying to get her to come home. She won't. And then um, so sometime in June, like 4 weeks later, um, I'm like, okay, fine, we'll get a divorce. And I talked to my priest. I get referred to a lawyer who was baptized in the parish, and he doesn't take retainer fees. Is that the thing?
I
Um,
have no idea.
he specializes in family law, and I move forward with filing, and I tell her you got to move your stuff out. So by the second week of June, she was moved out, and uh, my lawyer tries to reach out to her, but she doesn't respond, and it's not until like July that she finally starts talking to the lawyer, and then we had the Chicago conference, mid-Westuary, and then in the divorce was finalized in October, I think, just a bit before the anniversary,
Mm,
and I was at the point of the Midwestuary conference, I was about out of money. Um, and I just barely managed to get a contract job in September. Um, it's a big tech payment company everyone is familiar with. I'm not gonna say the name, but they were really happy with my work. My manager wanted to hire me full time, but the company shut down full time hires in North America. Like we've been going through a couple of years of pretty steady layoffs in tech at this point. But he was pretty hopeful he could get the contract extended past its end date on January 1st. But by the end of December, when we were going to break for Christmas, he had us all on a call to tell us he wasn't able to do that. So I've been out of work since January 1st again, and I've had to pull money out of a retirement account um,
mm,
so that I can make it through at least April while I'm interviewing and trying to get another job. So it's an open question whether or not I will get foreclosed on the house. It's not super straightforward to sell it. The um, the drop in housing prices has already been enough to eat my 10% down,
oh
and
no.
the double-headed tiled shower in the master bathroom, that was a big selling point for me. It turns out that the previous owners who did the remodeling did a lot of crappy work. And about a year ago, during a freeze, when I was dripping all the faucets, including the shower heads in the double shower, when I went down to the garage to work out in my garage gym, um, the there was a place in the drywall in the ceiling in the garage that was dripping water. And so we got a plumber out, and unfortunately, it wasn't a burst pipe. It was just that the um, tiled shower was not well done, and so it was leaking. And I'd already had Chad's number at that point, and he was doing those videos where he was, tiling on camera. So I knew he did that stuff. So I texted him, and he told me that you can't really spot fix that stuff. It's a whole bathroom remodel, and between the lack of blue collar workers because we push everyone towards college, even though that doesn't really work out. And inflation, that's at least 60 grand. And there are other issues with the house. So even if I could sell the house, it would be at least an $80,000 loss, I bet. And so I'd be in debt either way, but I've got no job. So like my best hope is to somehow continue to get work and pay my mortgage and save up enough money to get things fixed and then figure things out. Um, I would like to get back to being wealthy again, and I love having a garage gym, but I'm strongly considering moving closer to the university campus to be around the demographic of women I'm interested in. Um, but that's like, uh, a good 2 years if things go well, I expect, before I can make that transition. Because all the wealth I built up with the high base salary and the restricted stock units and all of that got wiped away from first the deposits on the wedding the first time we were engaged and paying my $3,200 a month mortgage plus bills and all that stuff, plus the $30,000 to $40,000 that the actual church wedding we had cost. So basically everything that I worked for from 2012 through 2024 has been completely wiped out at this point.
At this point, you announce your GoFundMe. So if you want to help me out with this month's mortgage, go Paul Rene Nichols at GoFundMe.com and send the Quan. Oh, Paul,
So,
what
so
a
yeah, that's
what
I
a
guess that's my
story.
life story.
Oh, oh, I'm so sorry, Paul. I'm so sorry.
Uh,
Are you still
well,
going to church?
uh, yeah, I mean, I spent November and December pretty much just drinking a lot and sleeping odd hours on my couch.
Oh,
Um, the there's something about sleeping on a couch with the TV on that relaxes me. Maybe it's because I grew up in a small house with
oh,
7 other people.
running the TV all the time. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like your nanny.
I mean that's another thing. It's like, not having that the community, the social life, um, TV, video games, movies, the internet and internet pornography, which was just JPEGs in the late 90s. But uh, and also, not getting my driver's license in my teens. I was I was doing the Zoomer thing before there were Zoomers.
Hmm.
Um, and so I see the current state of young men
Yeah.
as inevitable because it's um, you if you don't have the community, you're not being provided a purpose. You don't really have obligations. Nobody's really looking out for you, but the video game responds to you, and then that's that's a that's a downward spiral that makes you less and less social and capable of interacting. And that was already starting to hit some of us in the 90s, though we were we were the minority um, back then, but now it's so ubiquitous, and um, a lot of interaction with other people is through the internet, that's just um, the pattern we've set for people at this point.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was, I don't know, a preteen, I remember Terminator 2. I saw that in movie theaters when it was out. And I don't know the extent to which it's, let's say, growing up around boomer parents who were worried about the Cold War and had been in the army, or all the apocalyptic entertainment, or even if it's like a calling God has put on me to be aware of the coming collapse and to experience the corruption of humanity that all this technology and entertainment and stuff, and the breakdown of community and family, whether it's I have some hand in experiencing it, sort of like Christ dies and goes down to hell or whatever. Like I have to like live through this stuff to try and find an antidote towards it. But I've been very sensitive to the corruption and the incoherence that living in this um, post World War II um, world order does to us. And I've been through just about everything, like a broken home life, no community, turning to entertainment and technology, drugs and alcohol, situationships, online dating, hooking up, divorce. Like I've experienced just about every aspect of the way in which we've been twisted by turning away from people and turning towards technology and GDP and all this nonsense. Uh, but I haven't solved the problem yet,
No.
let's say.
And in all fairness to you, if you just say turning away from people generically, well, you would say, well, the answer then is turning towards people. Well, you did that, and you did that with a woman who also had some baggage, and turning towards her and marrying her also didn't just solve everything either. Now, someone might say, well, if you had picked better, yeah, but it's helpful to just eliminate the silver bullets here.
Well,
Um,
and that's the thing is um, Taoism broke me from the materialist frame.
mhm,
Um, and that made me ready for Peugeot.
mhm.
And I I took the clean up your room seriously.
Yep,
I took the become a Christian seriously.
yep,
And like what I said on Luke's stream a week or so ago, I said, church is not a community. Church is an epiphenomenon of community.
mm,
Um, we're we're not gonna we're not gonna clean our room out of this.
yeah,
We're not gonna go to church out of this
yeah,
because um, we we live in this well, we live in this individualist blank slate culture where you tell little girls you can be president someday or whatever, and you can do anything you want. And um, we're all about freedoms and rights, which is just another way of saying I deserve.
yeah,
And community is built on duty and obligation, which is a completely different framing of things. And the the reason I have turned away from Jordan Peterson is because as much as a lot of what he says is good and it helped people break out of frames that were not serving those people, at the root of Peterson is a post World War II world order boomer individualism, which is the problem. And it doesn't matter if you clean your room in a burning house. And the social infrastructure necessary to make marriage work, like in a traditional community where marriages are mostly arranged and women don't leave their father's house until they get married, you've got families who've got survival at stake who are trying to keep this marriage together. And all marriages are going to run into the rocks at some point or another because there's going to be health issues or there's going to be money issues. And not that we don't have families, churches aren't really communities. They can be a seed for people rebuilding community, but that's difficult when your every day is being this individualist American. And even if you're Orthodox, going to church on Sunday, like you're an American first. And um, so whereas before in the past we had a community where I had obligations to it and it had obligations to me, and it looked out for me and it tried to keep my life together and I tried to keep the community together. Um, you could get through things like that. Like nothing was ever perfect. It wasn't a utopia. People didn't have the rights and freedoms, but you belong to people and people belong to you, and that means something. And now we put our seniors away in retirement homes and hospice, and we don't want to see them dying. We don't have kids. We're not obligated to each other. And if you're going to make a marriage work as a man, you have to you have to manage all the stuff about dealing with a woman on your own. You don't have a community to help you, and you have to be the kind of man who is so valuable and so attractive that you can maintain your wife's emotional interest. And and then on top of that, like I have to have bank accounts and I have to have retirement accounts and I have to manage all these passwords on my own. Um, but like really like if I was in a clan, I wouldn't have to do all this stuff on my own. And that's the reason people are failing is because they've been whittled down to the individual and they don't have a structure to support them anymore. And it's every man for themselves.
It'll be interesting. I mean, I'll say a few things here. One of the things is for some people that they're sort of at a place where cleaning their room gets them over a hump. There are also various levels of community that people do or don't live within. Now, as you began this talk, you talked about the fact that, I mean, the breakdown already occurred at the grandparents' level. And obviously, there are a lot of people that live perhaps not at that multi-generational layer of dysfunction getting transmitted, but there's more, and so they sort of can regulate things as they go through. And I think the a summation of what you just said is similar to this conversation we've been having. The institutions have failed. The institutions have fallen. And I think, if we look at Jordan Hall's communion, community, um, it does start with communion. And you're right that just joining a church and even having your godfather be a priest doesn't necessarily won't necessarily save you from much. Now, I've also seen, for example, there was a young man who was connected to Living Stones for a while. He grew up in a tremendously dysfunctional home. He wound up in juvie, as a teenager, and there was a Pentecostal minister who had himself been in juvie in prison and gotten his life straightened out and gotten married and became a pastor and started a church. There's a lot of those guys around here, actually, if you're in the right neighborhoods. And so he picks up this kid in juvie and you know, he basically says to this kid, "You move into my house." And the kid moves into his house. And okay, from there on, he is watching and helping and supporting, and the young man becomes a Christian, and really straightens out his life, is able to get some relationships settled with his family of origin. They're doing a little better. His mom's in his second marriage to a better man, and he starts working for that company, and so he picks up a skill. And then he gets married, and beautiful girl, nice girl, but high standards, higher standards than him. They have two kids. Eventually, she divorces him because she's not tremendously impressed with his performance as a father, and as a husband. And also, but she's also sort of chasing some of the things that you would very easily be able to criticize out in the world. She wants a guy that's not driving a Yaris, or a pickup truck. She wants a 666 guy, and so she pulls the kids away. I mean, and I just watched all of this stuff happen. I couldn't do much with it. You know, there's what you say is a tremendous story of life in this world. And things can get better, but they'll never sort of hit perfect. And there are always trade-offs with all these things. It'll be very interesting for me to see the degree to which we don't see sort of a going back to some of the monastic institutions that we saw sort of, you have the collapse of late antiquity, and that's sort of when the church begins to arise, partly because people made exactly the same observation you did. In some ways, people began to say, it's not only the case that other people need adult supervision, I need adult supervision, which is why I call my priest father. And it's also not the case that just going to church when I feel like it isn't probably going to do it. I need to maybe not even go to church once a week. I need to go to church every day and check in with my father. And I need to, and so, I mean, this is probably the way we as a culture we're going to see more and more of those communal situations happening, and they will be probably fairly strict religious communal situations because they're going to curtail, and you're not going to oversleep, you're not going to overdrink, you're not going to overuse the internet. You are going to maybe go to work that doesn't make that much money, but you're probably going to give most of that money to the community. And you can even run communities different ways. It's a really fun thing to read the story of the Oneida community in upstate New York, where you're going to marry this person over here. And it's like, do I really want to marry that person over there? You say you want arranged marriage? We'll arrange it for you. And you say, well, my last wife, she was a solid 8 at 24. And this one's maybe a 4 at 30. And it's like up, up, up. You want discipline, you want community, you want communion. You're gonna marry the 4 at 30. Don't think too long and hard about the 8 when she was 24. And this is probably what we're gonna see as people with your story. If people with your story begin to take things seriously, because here's the trade-offs with communion. You're exactly right. What you trade with communion is liberty. And liberty meaning I get to sleep when I want. I get to spend my money when I want. I get to live where I want. I get to live with whom I want, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to be a really interesting negotiation watching, um, let's say, refugees of liberty decide how much they're willing to spend. And I don't mean that monetarily. I mean how much of their liberty they're willing to exchange for what levels of communion. Because the truth is, if you go back in history, you can find this equation, this experiment has been run over and over and over and over again. And every time you run it, of course, there's a bunch of different variables, but that's almost always the exchange is to what is my communion going to cost me? Now, in some ways, every marriage is that transaction. Every marriage says, I'm going to lose a degree of liberty and I'm going to buy communion with it. And every marriage is a risk too, because the truth is, especially if you're married for decades, well, you might not discover that borderline personality in the first few years of marriage. That might creep in later, but you made that vow till death do you part. And then, it's not my money and your money, it's our money. And then kids come along, and those kids are along for the ride. And even if one of the partners is a little shaky in terms of how well they're actually put together in terms of industriousness or whether they're actually going to conscientiousness. I mean, that's human life. And you have allies with your priest and your godfather and your church. But part of the difficulty here in libertarian America is the person who decides how much they're actually going to submit to these things is the same chooser that's got that track record in the past. And so, I'm not surprised that rigorous submission oriented Christianity is on the rise. And I'm not surprised that Orthodoxy is getting some traction. The Pentecostals that, my friend hooked up with, they're very into submission. I mean, and when the pastor moved him into the house, it was like, here's the rules. You're going to obey them. And if you don't obey them, I'll put you back out on the street. And you'll probably next up wind up in real prison. So those are your choices. And, for him, part of the difficulty, as you notice, is that those who are fortunate enough to be born into really healthy, multiple generation family systems surrounded by community, they have such a leg up. And it's completely unfair because they didn't earn it. It was a gift given to them by God, by their parents, by their grandparents. And I think you're right that we have now built a society of immense power and freedom which is really straining these things and pulling them apart. It's always been the case that all of those wonderful things were never a complete solution or protection, but they certainly gave people better odds. And then when the difficulties came, the individual instincts that were built into the children really helped them in dealing with the spouse that isn't doing so well, or the loss of a job, or the betrayal by someone else. And so, and that's sort of how the world works. So I appreciate the fact that, well, you don't really have any choice. You kind of got to get up back on that horse and say, all right, let's have another go at this life. And you know what? I've learned some things by the years that I've put in. And I've now, my church might not be the level of communion I would like it to be, but I bet you if you go to that church and say, I really need you to dial the communion level up for me, and what I'm willing to do is submit, or point me to a community that is really pursuing communion, and maybe I'll sell my house at a loss, but maybe I can find, maybe I can find an in real life community where I will submit. You can look at, you can look for Julian, one of the OG randos here in the TLC. He's a Hutterite. There's the Bruderhof, the Mennonite community. I think it's only a matter of time until we see more. It's difficult for the Orthodox because you're sort of thinly spread out through everywhere. But Americans are pretty mobile, and I think it's only a matter of time till we see more Orthodox communities form where there are refugees, in some ways, depending on how things go, like yourself, who say, I'm in. I'm going to surrender my liberty. I might even surrender my demand for a hot wife. I might even surrender my demand for a wife completely. I might even surrender my demand that I'll make that I have children, but I am going to go to this community and I'm going to submit to this community. And obviously, in America, you'll probably get a pretty good look at it and decide, are they for real? Do they have my best interest at heart? Are they really making good on the hope of communion? But I wouldn't be surprised if that's sort of the next stage of sort of this Orthodox moment that we see, that they begin to establish communities of, let's say, refugees of libertarian America who, because this has been done in America right from the start. In fact, one might argue that if you go to Plymouth, Massachusetts, that was in many ways the original attempt at religious Christian based communion. Because if you lived in Plymouth Plantation, church was mandatory every Sunday. And, they very much policed everyone's behavior. And it might be an interesting study for you to read some of what happened with those early Calvinist attempts at communion. So,
I have some of that uh w- that New England, what are they,
yeah, 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 yeah,
puritanical
yeah,
stuff in me, but
yeah. So what do you think? Do you think, I mean, because what I hear you saying is it's one thing to blame the system. That's perhaps the biggest woke move.
it
Blame the system.
I mean
And
it's not the it's not the system exactly. It's um I mean, number one is I don't think that there will be any change until um people run out of options. And so it's going to have to be um it's maybe the American empire doesn't collapse, but this fake mythical republic, democracy, constitution stuff, which has always been a lie and it was born of rebellion, and it's got all these fake things like your kids are going to have a completely different culture from you and you're not going to be able to connect, and there's going to be no community and no continuity until we get to the point where we run out of money and um, everyone realizes we live in an authoritarian state run by the CIA and the NSA and the FBI and the shadow government of bureaucrats that are never elected. And we stop pretending that we have meaningful elections and that we're a world full of these nation states that have their own elections, and we're all somehow Somalia and Nigeria and the UK and Britain and China are somehow similar in any way. And until we're taken down a peg and we actually have to rely on each other to survive, which is the Amish, like they 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 stay away from certain technologies that would weaken the community, that would pull you away from the community. They don't do automation that would make work easier. They don't do because they're going to do that as a group together. And that's we've made this deal with the devil where wealth and convenience and independence and luxury are all we really care about. And as long as we can afford to keep doing that, which we're doing personally by running up our credit cards and nationally by running up our debt, until that system breaks, there's not going to be any change. All we've done is like, this is a old saw for me, but states don't have culture anymore. You aren't really a Texan. It used to be the case, that the state appointed the senators. Then we wanted to make it more democratic and made it popularly elected, and now they're effectively national elections because money comes in from California, New York into Texas senatorial elections. So it's not even really a state election. And sure, you can move to Texas for slightly fewer taxes, or you can move to California, and if you really want good weather and you can pay for it, but they're not that substantively different. And what we need subsidiarity. We, and I'm about at the point where, if I could just wave a wand and say, God, make this happen, I would put, I'd stop free trade between the states. Um, if you moved to Texas, you couldn't, or California, you couldn't vote in elections until you became a citizen of the state, which would be hard. Maybe, and the same thing for people coming in from other countries. You probably shouldn't be able to vote for a few generations, and that would make us a lot poorer. Um, but it would keep people in a single place and would force them to work with each other. And all we do now is, oh, things go bad in California, oh, we're going to move to Texas during the lockdown. Things go bad in New York, we're going to move to Florida. And no one has any obligations to anyone, and we're all paying up taxes to the federal government, and all sorts of monkey business can happen with that because there's no oversight. But if we did it where at the municipal level, that's where almost all the decision making happens, and then a lot less happens at the county level and a lot less happens at the state level, and the taxes happen in that way. You're taxed by the municipality, the county taxes the city, the state taxes the county, the feds tax the states. If we had that proper hierarchy, that would eliminate all that stuff. But the empire that we built wanted to make us individuals. It wanted to make everyone work and pay taxes. It wanted to isolate people. And I don't want to go all the way to conspiracy that this was, strictly intentional, but I'm willing to go to the point where the prince of this world, Lucifer, wanted this to happen. And we can't we can't live this way, but it's not going to change until the wheels come off and everything crashes, because that's
Well,
just not who people are.
well,
We're not going to fix stuff.
well, congratulations, little master of the universe. You have talked about we forever, but the truth is you're not in charge of we. You don't have a magic wand. You can have all of the great ideas you've ever wanted to have. And you can even have a YouTube channel and tell the internet exactly what's wrong with everything. The only thing and the only one that you're actually in charge and responsible for is you. And so then the question is, what will you do? And because that's the most important thing for you to figure out. And in some ways, to talk about we and all of this, that's fine, can be helpful, you can be right, but you're the one that has to decide for you. And so, I think, when you talk about, well, I'll get some more contract work and I'll dig myself out of this hole and I'll fix the bathroom and I'll get some savings together and then I can sell this house and then maybe I'll do this other thing. I mean, that's all fine. And I think all of that is good enough and you're certainly welcome to do it. Maybe that's exactly what you will do. But if you actually want to address that we, it might be that you decide that you, this is sort of a Jordan Peterson thing too, that you do something that contributes to beyond the we more than just talk about it. So maybe you can, dig yourself out of this or find an Orthodox community or something like that and practice the vision that you're sort of seeing. Because again, I think you've identified it very well, but the trade-off is liberty versus communion. And so the reasonable thing to do would to start working that matrix and to go, you're not even in charge of the church you go to, but you know the priest who is, and you've got some community there to go to them and say, what would it be for us to up our level of communion more? Because I certainly could, one of the things that was right off the top of my head would be probably if you want to get the kind of wife that you're looking for, prioritizing their age is probably not the best way to start. And I
Well,
know it's
I'm gonna disagree with you there, though I don't think that this is the place to go into details about it because
okay.
every whenever I talk about this stuff in public, I get a lot of shade thrown at me for my opinions. So as much as
But
I,
I would say find, you talk about arranged marriage, let your priest do some looking for you and give your priest veto power over who you
they,
date.
I mean, there aren't Orthodox women don't exist in this world. We're all Americans now.
Well, maybe you need a mail order bride from Ukraine or
I
Russia.
mean, they're just as American as we are. And the passport bro thing always fails because you bring them here and they become American and they get American friends and they acquire all of the issues you were trying to avoid before. So my recommendation to someone like me or people who aspire to some level of success is if you can be an entrepreneur and you can become filthy rich, what the Catholics and the Orthodox need is they need wealthy patrons who run businesses, who can employ people outside of the current social, economic, political system, which penalizes us for being different from the rest of everybody. And we need to turn our economic power into political power and then not to take over the country or take over the world, but to just buttress ourselves against what's coming. If you want to have a community, you need resources. You need to be able to employ people, men, so that they have the money so that they can marry women. And so we need people to become patrons. We need people to become founders and CEOs. And we need those people to live out their supposed self-proclaimed values using those companies and that money. And that patronage is the way forward because I'm not going to go start a farming community. That's very difficult to do. I would like it if some people do, but like the suburb where I live right now used to be all farmland. It's getting turned into houses and apartments. And land is becoming more and more expensive. So I think we've we've got to play in the devil's world, and you're not going to become a king of the nation, but maybe you can become a king of a corporation and you can use that towards some good.
It would have been really helpful if the Son of God had come with a trust fund. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we often have iconography in our churches, the specific form where it's some sort of king or lord or something, and in his hand is a church, and he's offering that church up. And that's the same symbolism as the people who go and bake the bread and bring the wine for communion. What it is it's raising up earth and offering it towards heaven.
Right.
And we need people to do that at the heights and at scale in a way that they can build churches and cathedrals, that they can pay for the education of priests, that we can get more bishops, and that we can employ our young men in productive things that will allow them to build families and community. And as long as we are working for people that hate us and we're having to lie to play that game, we're going to be captured by the structure of this world. And I don't see a way out of it unless we can acquire some economic and political power so we can carve out a space for ourselves.
I think if Jesus, because I remember Jesus was tempted first at stone into bread, and then take a little leap off of the pinnacle of the temple. And the third one, maybe that one sort of fits the bill a little better because if Satan sort of looks over the kingdoms of the world and says to Jesus, I can put you in charge. You can be the patron. You can have all of that money to leverage the systems to build it, to shape this world the way you want to, Jesus. Why didn't he take it?
Uh, I'll counter that.
Okay.
Um, there's a former Navy SEAL who's quite famous that lives in San Diego, Jocko Willink, and he's got a podcast. He was started blowing up around the same time Jordan Peterson
Yep.
did,
Yep.
and Akira the Don did a bunch of meaning wave stuff with.
Yep.
Um, he talks about, you're a mid-level officer and you've got enlisted troops under you and you've got all these sorts of superiors above you. And the way the people above you are directing things is you don't agree with it and you know it's wrong and you know it's going to get people killed. And if you participate in it, you're going to hurt a lot of people. And I'm not talking about the enemies, just your own guys.
Right.
And the thing he says is, well, if I don't suck it up, then I won't be there for my guys to take care of them. And so there's this dichotomy here. Is like, sure, I could go and be as pure as possible and not care about money and give all my money to the poor, and I can become a monk and move into a monastery, or I can go and I can be filthy rich and sleep with a bunch of young women or whatever. Like, to me, that this purity versus impurity, it's a false dichotomy because, like a lot of things in life, you're trying to create a fine-tuned balance between opposing forces. And sometimes you have to suck it up and do things you don't like because there are people you have to take care of. And sometimes you can do the right thing and not engage in worldly stuff. But as long as we're in this world, there will be kings and there will be war and there will be suffering and there will be corruption. It doesn't matter whether it's Joel Osteen in his basketball arena church where he's wearing expensive suits and driving expensive cars, or if it's a bishop who likes luxury too much. We're always going to have corruption. The thing is like, are we doing things in a way that is as honest as possible and makes corruption as clear as possible and feeds into our passions and our evil desires as little as possible? And we do need, it's not enough to get rid of Zuckerberg and Bezos and Microsoft and Google. That's not enough to just say wealth and success is evil and these people are evil because they're brain rotting our kids with iPads. That's all fine. What we need virtuous people in those high positions who are doing similar things to Apple and Google, but they're doing it in a less toxic, less obnoxious way. And they feel an obligation to their employees, and they feel an obligation to the communities that the money they pay feeds. And so, so I'm saying is like, you're not going to avoid war, you're not going to avoid kings, but if we can have war that is as virtuous as possible, kings that are as virtuous as possible, that's about the best we can do. And if we want to if we want to enforce this vision of Christianity where like power is off limits and kings are off limits and success is off limits and we gotta be goody goodies and all this stuff. I don't think that's going to work because we have to interface us with this world, and we have to directly counter this stuff head on by each generation doing a slightly better, slightly more moral version of this until we get back to some form of Christendom. Um, and I don't see a way around that, to be honest.
Paul, you make great speeches. I love listening to your speeches. You are such a good speaker. I'd be a little worried, and maybe I should be a little worried that you're going to become a cult leader because you are
Oh, dude,
really
no, I,
good.
I, I will.
I,
I assure you.
I would love to hear you make one of these speeches without using the word we or they. Use the first person singular and make a speech.
Uh, well, I mean that people have to operate in bodies.
People, nope, nope, nope. That's third person. I want first person.
Uh, I'm gonna do the 50 Cent thing, and I'm gonna get rich or die trying. Um, like point blank, straight up, 100. I'm, and it's
Mission accomplished.
it's
Mission accomplished. You did it.
it's
You gave me the speech within the first person. You did it. Congratulations. I didn't think you could, but you did. See, you're a great speaker.
and I don't it's but I take me people should take me seriously.
I do.
It's hard because I'm so funny, and the things I say are outrageous. But yeah, like I've tried the materialist thing. I've tried the drugs and the alcohol. I've tried the professional corporate career and getting married. And I've I made a promise to God that I wouldn't be a king.
Mm,
Um, and I think that that was wrong. And I think the only path left for me is um, trying to climb as high as I can and using what I build um, to gather people and build a new ethnos that can survive what's coming.
okay. Okay. I'll take that. And when you correct me if I'm wrong, but when you marry in the Orthodox Church, don't they give you a crown, right? I mean, they sort of make you king
Yeah,
over the
it's
house.
crowns of martyrdom.
Oh,
Uh,
I maybe should have stuck with the planet shakers. I mean, the Orthodox.
well, it's like if you get children, that's great. And yeah, you need to raise them to know God and know the church. But the for us, marriage is um yeah, this is not I hate talking about heaven because it's theological nonsense, but it's to help each other get to heaven.
Yeah,
It's a spiritual thing,
yeah.
and it's being tied together and forced to work through things together spiritually and to get through life that way. That's what it's about. And so yeah, we talk about it the crowns of martyrdom and tying life together, and it's about dying to yourself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's good. That's really good. That is what marriage is like. It's dying to yourself, and it's living for your partner, it's living for your kids, it's living for your community. It's all in the hope of communion. Ideally, families can be communions. They're pretty small usually, and then they are even in this age. And it's sad, I lament the fact that the brokenness, you've had multiple generations of brokenness and that you didn't have parents that stayed together and sacrificed for the kids and knew that, you don't drink, you don't share a beer with your 6-year-old, and you don't take him to spring break out at the island by the college kids coming down there, and you don't let them smoke weed, and you do teach them how to do chores and to put the family before himself, even just in the little things as a child of keeping the room clean and emptying the dishwasher and cutting the grass. I mean, all those things. And I'm really sorry that you didn't get that. I'm sorry you didn't get the same kind of upbringing I got because my parents weren't perfect, but my grandparents, all four of them stayed together. They all were diligent Christians who looked out for their kids, educated them, sacrificed for them. None of them left this world with any money to speak of. And then they all had kids that my parents' generation who did the same thing for their kids. And none of us in my generation, none of us are perfect. We all have our own failures, but we're way ahead of the odds of the average American in all sorts of metrics. Church attendance, some down the lane started wandering away from church, and I expect that you've got this broad, multi-layered view, and I expect that the chaos will continue in those who begin to walk away from the church. Now, some might come back, but the church, while not perfect, is in many ways the best we've got, I think, for families and children and multiple generation and hope for communion and community. So, um,
Well,
so I go ahead.
it's like Jonathan Pageau. Um, he said it's because of the breakdown in the story of the Enlightenment and materialism that people can start to see the symbolic again, and that you can talk about it explicitly. And I see something similar in my life. To the extent that I I now have a complete vision of how people are supposed to live and relate to each other. The only reason I have access to that is because I've lived through a complete breakdown of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had to see, and it every time I thought I got a full revelation of everything,
You
which has
got
been
more.
many times, um, the like I achieved a certain level of enlightenment with Taoism, and I thought I understood all sorts of things, and then Christianity and the marriage and all this. There's always a bit more, but it's living through all that breakdown and seeing like, yeah, the individualism doesn't work, the hedonism doesn't work, um, treating everybody as individual economic units doesn't work. Um, that I can see, well, okay, clearly there are reasons why people organize themselves differently before. And it's going to take a lot more breakdown before more people see that and they recognize that freedom, the freedom we have now and the rights we have now are just the freedom to destroy yourself, either quickly or slowly.
Yeah.
And um, that has to end. Um, and it will be painful.
Yeah, it's probably true. It's probably true. Well, gosh, Paul, I love you, man. I really do. I love your heart. I love your gifts. I love your gift of gab. Um, and well, would you let this Protestant pastor pray for you?
Sure, sure.
All right. Lord, I love Paul and you love him more. And Lord, I cry with him the intergenerational breakdowns that he has had to suffer and endure. And I cry with him the death of really two marriages. One was unofficial and the other was official. And I pray, Lord, that you would be with both of those women, that you would bless them, that you would heal them, that you would help them find what they truly need, and help them to begin to build a life on something more solid, more substantial. And Lord, I know Paul is kind of in a bind now. He's in a money bind. Um, in terms of his house and his employment, I pray, Lord, that you bring a good job in for him, that he can keep his mortgage, he can fix the shower. If he decides to get out of that house, he can get out of that house and not lose his shirt. I pray, Lord, that he might be able to rebuild his bank account and put some savings under him again. I even pray, Lord, that you would find a good life partner for him who can be the kind of spouse he's really looking for, and that he could be the kind of husband that he desires to be. Lord, I pray for all these good things for him. But most of all, Lord, I pray that you would lead him and guide him, that you would help him to find the way. I pray, Lord, for his church. I pray for his priest, his godfather. I ask, Lord, that he might find the kind of communion that he so desperately wants and, in fact, needs. Um, a community that and relationships that he can submit to, that he can listen to when he needs to not not take so many liberties with his desires. And I pray, Lord, that he's been through a lot in his life, and Lord, he wants good things. He wants good things, and so I pray, Lord, that you would give him the desires of his heart, that he could have these good things, and that he could be the beginning of, at some point in his life, another family where the children will be blessed by parents who stay together and just pour out their lives for those kids. And that those children too might have children of their own, and there might be grandchildren, and that the family could walk in faith, and the family could be your witnesses in a world where he's exactly right. Individuals just do what they want. So I pray, Lord, that you would bless him with all of these things. And Lord, I know that the road, in fact, for all these things will not be easy, that certain things in him will need to die. And I pray, Lord, that you would help that happen too. And that in this path, that he too might be your witness, that he too might be able to proclaim that you are the King of Kings and you are the Lord of Lords, and that you can work even in a very dark and dysfunctional world, and that we can see your light, we can see your church, we can see your people, and we can begin to taste your glory and your goodness in this life as we move on from here into the next. So hear my prayer in the name of Jesus. Amen. It's so good to talk to you, Paul. It's so good to talk to you. This is
Mm.
to share, right? I know you want people to know
Oh,
your story.
oh yeah. The my birthday is the third. I was hoping you could make this public on the third if possible.
All right, I'll do that. I'll do that. I'll put it in no wait, no ads until then. And if you need to support, if you want to send Paul money, he's not hard to find in the corner. If you got a well, you already got a good divorce lawyer, so he's set with that. But if you have a job for Paul, point him in the right direction too. He needs work, and I will release this on February 3, your birthday. How old will you be?
44.
44. You've lived a bunch of life in those 44 years.
I've lived a handful of lives. I'm
Indeed, you have.
I'm a very young 90-year-old man.
Well, Paul, this was well worth my time, and yeah, I will keep praying for you and your church and your godfather and your priest and your god's son in Florida with his family. And I pray, Lord, that God does in fact give you the desires of your heart. So
Thank you.
it was good talking to you, man. And yeah, there'll be reactions. We know they will, but Paul, I think you're a favorite in the TLC. What can I say? You just are.
TLC famous.
TLC famous. All right, Paul, you take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.